we need to know is just how many people are there, how long the operation can continue. Is there a possibility that they will try and keep it going? And I think I can say I am joined by the Foreign Secretary now. Thank you very much for coming on the show. James Cleverly, do we have any idea how many British nationals or dual nationals are still in Sudan? Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nick. Thank you. Look, an incredibly important question. And the truth is, no government can really ever have a complete idea of how many of their nationals are in a given country. We don't demand British people register with us when they go overseas. We have encouraged them to register their details with us when the conflict erupted. But of course, when people move, and a number of people who have evacuated through routes other than the airstrip in Wadi Sidna, they may have moved, they may not be able to re-establish contact with us. So this is always a very, very difficult number to assess accurately, and the number changes pretty regularly as well.
Newspapers speculate it is either side of 1,000. Taking on board, it's impossible for you to give you an accurate figure. Would that be one that would seem at least acceptable to you and other government departments?
Well, look, I think that seems a reasonable order of magnitude. But what we are saying is that we can't know for certain. But what we do know is that the ceasefire is scheduled to end late tonight. We do know that we have aircraft in the air taking people out of Sudan as we speak. We know that we have aircraft on the ground ready to accept more. And so whilst there is much uncertainty in this whole situation, what we do know is that we have capacity at the moment, and that's why we're encouraging British nationals to come forward now to make their way through Khartoum. They have been facilitated thus far by the Sudanese belligerents to get to Wadi Sidna, where we are able to evacuate people, and we are encouraging them to do so.
Foreign Secretary, how likely is it that after the ceasefire, an evacuation operation of some sorts would continue involving the British military?
Well, we had always planned for evacuation missions in a range of circumstances, what we call permissive. That is what we are seeing at the moment, where there is a ceasefire, where there is a cooperation of the Sudanese fighters. We have also got plans in place for a less permissive or a non-permissive environment. That is, for example, if there is conflict or if the Sudanese armed forces are not facilitating the movement through Khartoum. In a non-permissive environment, it is much, much, much harder, potentially impossible. We will keep planning. We're not going to give up, and we have facilitated land routes of exit as well as this air route of exit. But it is really impossible to say with any certainty what the environment might be like once this ceasefire has come to the end. That's why we're saying people should move now. We recognise it is still difficult, but we envisage it potentially being significantly more difficult once the ceasefire comes to an end.
Can we drill down a little bit more into events in Sudan? Have you had a conversation yet, or has the ambassador explained to you as to why he was on leave, his deputy was not on station, and neither was the head of security?
Look, I think it's really important that we recognise that diplomats travel in and out of the countries that they're posted to all the time. They sometimes take time off, they sometimes go to regional conferences, they sometimes have to come back to the UK under circumstances. The second in command was at post and was leading the post when this kicked off. Actually, the fact that the ambassador himself was able to very quickly plug into the crisis response centre in London proved to be very, very useful, in fact invaluable, because he had contemporary knowledge from the ground which helped us plan the evacuation route. So, senior diplomatic staff come in and out of their posts regularly. There's nothing particularly unusual about that, particularly as this was Ramadan.
But the deputy was the deputy there, Mr. Cleverly? You're saying he was?
So the number two, and I know this is slightly anachronistic, the deputy head of mission is not actually the number two at the embassy. I know that sounds funny, but that is the case. The number two of the embassy was at the embassy and was in command of the embassy.
Why is it, would appear to be the case, that all the embassy staff have been safely evacuated, but British nationals have been left behind? It's rather contrary to what we witnessed in Afghanistan 2 summers ago.
Well, the circumstances in Sudan and the circumstances in Afghanistan are fundamentally different, and that's really important to understand. In Khartoum, where our embassy is and where our ambassadorial staff live was right in the heart of the most intense part of the conflict. In fact, the Sudanese equivalent to the Ministry of Defence headquarters was pretty much next door to the British embassy and was the location of some pretty fierce fighting. We also know that diplomatic staff internationally were specifically being targeted by some of the members of the armed forces, and we have a legal duty to protect our staff, which we have to discharge.
But so does the UN. Their special envoy has stayed, as have other ambassadors. The Brits, I hate to put it like this, have cut and run, Mr. Cleverly.
We have British diplomatic staff in Khartoum facilitating the evacuation of British nationals, both at Wadi Sidr and at Port Sudan. So we removed the diplomats that were in direct danger and we replaced them with diplomats who had specific hostile environment training, who are on the ground in Sudan supporting British nationals through the evacuation.
What is the capacity of the aircraft that have been deployed? I understand they're the Hercules, and is it right, the A400M Atlas or whatever it might be? What level of passengers or personnel can they take?
So we are looking at just over 100 people per aircraft that is leaving.
But they're not always full, are they, Foreign Secretary?
No, they're not always full. And
why would that be?
What you have to understand, and this is a byproduct of military logistics, there is limited ground space at Wadi Sidr Air Base. If an aircraft is on the ground, it prevents another aircraft from landing. So if an aircraft is nearly full, but it's preventing a completely empty aircraft from landing, then actually we're limiting the flow rate through the airbase. So it's better on occasions for an aircraft to take off with a few empty slots so that a new empty aircraft can land and take more people through. Sorry, I know it sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah, that doesn't. So I'm not going to fill an aircraft. Sorry, have I got people waiting, or there's no one waiting?
If there's a pause in the flow of people, if there's no one waiting,
I see.
It is better the aircraft take off with maybe like 5 empty slots, so that a new aircraft can arrive with over 100 slots. Because if we prevent that empty aircraft from landing, we create a backlog.
A couple of journalists have been involved in this. One is Layla Latif, who wrote in The Guardian yesterday. You'll have been too busy to see it, I'm sure, but maybe one of your colleagues want to explain to it. She makes the following point. On Sunday the 23rd, the official British government advice to her and her family was to stay inside and not join the UN convoy to Port Sudan. But embassy staff joined the convoy, as all foreign nationals are allowed to do. Why were they discouraged from joining an evacuation effort that was safe for embassy staff but not safe for them?
Well, so our embassy staff weren't evacuated through the road convoy. Our embassy staff were evacuated by air. So I think there might have been a bit of a miscommunication there. We have to make risk judgments all the time. There have been a number of reports of people in those early days prior to the ceasefire attempting to move through Khartoum that then got caught up in the fighting, which proved to be more dangerous than staying put. Until we were able to create, until we and our international friends and allies had impressed upon the generals the importance of a ceasefire, Khartoum itself was an incredibly dangerous place, and moving around in it was incredibly dangerous. Some people took the risk, and sometimes risks pay off, but in good conscience, it would not be appropriate for me to advise people to move through what we knew to be an active conflict zone.
I have one final question for you.
Sure.
Layla is one journalist. There are others who are talking about there being issues. There's a journalist with the Daily Telegraph who's still struggling to get his cousin out. Foreign Secretary, do you feel the need to apologise to anyone who's been caught up in this way, or indeed felt abandoned by the government during the crisis, because they are saying there's not been the same level of contact from the embassy in Sudan there has from other countries? Is an apology, are they worthy of an apology?
We have been attempting to communicate through multiple channels multiple times a day. What we know to be the case, and we've had direct feedback from the people who we have evacuated, is the communications network in Sudan, in Khartoum, has been incredibly patchy. People who have been able to contact us at certain points of the day have lost contact with us at other points of the day. We have been constantly trying to push information through, both directly through broadcast media like this, also through social media channels and WhatsApp networks. We will continue to do so. We will continue to give all the advice we can, but people need to understand that the communications network in Khartoum is incredibly
But
inconsistent.
for those who feel they've been left behind, again, I'll ask you for a second time, if I may, Foreign Secretary, do you think you want to apologise?
Well, we've made every effort to maintain contact with them. As I say, we cannot control the communications network in Khartoum.
So there's not an
all
apology.
all we can control is our actions, and we have been constantly attempting to update people throughout this.
Grateful for your time. Thank you. I appreciate you're a very busy man. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly appearing here on LBC where the time is 5 to 9. More on that debate in the next hour, and we are coming to teachers as well. But let's make a complete change of pace. And as you know on this show, we only ever do books if we either like the book or the man or woman who's written it.